So hello everybody and a very warm welcome. I'm so looking forward to this discussion. We're going to be talking about decarbonising crypto. Where do we go from here? If I could introduce myself for a second, my name is Julia Streets. I'm the founder and the CEO of a business development, marketing, communications consultancy. We're called Streets Consulting. And what we do basically is we help fintechs to grow from the earliest startups to some of the world's largest financial institutions and industry bodies in between, who are all basically galvanizing debate, representing points of view, challenging our thinking, and actually bringing some, hopefully some consensus and some representation in the industry. This question about decarbonisation of crypto comes up over and over and over again in the context, of course, of sustainability. And we've got a cracking couple of guests for you today, so I can't wait to get into it. If I could just take a minute to introduce you to our guests. First of all, Kirsteen Harrison joins us. So she is an environmental and sustainability advisor. Let me just give you a little bit of insight before I do that. Kirsteen, it's lovely to see you. How are you?
Very good, and thanks so much for having me, Julia.
I'm so looking forward to your points of view on this. It's going to be fantastic. So for the benefit of the audience, so welcome everybody who's joined us. Let me tell you a little bit about her career. So she's worked with all manner of different companies of different shapes and different sizes, different sectors, different industries, and is a freelance consultant. And Zumo is one of her clients. She's working very, very closely with them while they're thinking this through. Her experience thinks about the circular economy, sort of environmental points of view, carbon footprinting, and everything around reporting in that, and sees all of this as really a new challenge, if you like, for a new world as well. She's also focused very much on strategy, alignment, implementation, programs, etc. And so her work with Zumo, she's leading a number of initiatives and projects and discussions about, of course, the quest for net carbon zero. So let me just tell you a little bit about Zumo. She's here to represent Zumo today, and actually is going to be presenting some research, which I'm always excited about when we start with a bit of research. So Zumo, of course, I'm sure you all know this, but they are all about buying, selling, sending and spending of your digital assets in a seamless, simple and secure way. Gives you the ability to set up and manage your own decentralized cryptocurrency wallet infrastructure. And of course, you can begin to see how all of this comes to life together when we begin to discuss why the conversation about decarbonisation in crypto really matters. So delighted you're with us, delighted you're with us. And my second guest today is Ian Taylor, who is the Executive Director of CryptoUK, known to many, I'm sure, for his passion in the industry. Ian, great to see you. How are you?
I'm very well. Great to see you again, Julia. Thank you so much for inviting us to discuss this very important topic with you today.
It is important topic, and what I love about it is we've got the practitioner and the kind of industry point of view, we've got the advisor, sustainability expert point of view, and we're going to get into here. But before we do that, let me just tell you, for the benefit of the audience, a little bit more about Ian. He spent 20 years in investment banking and has held many senior roles in the worlds of trading, treasury and risk management, and today he's involved with a major global bank. Now he's also, one job isn't enough, he's also the Executive Director of CryptoUK, where he and his team have built out a community of 60 plus of the world's most influential industry participants, and he campaigns relentlessly for a fit-for-purpose regulatory frameworks in the UK, Europe and beyond. He's clearly, as you would expect, a real advocate and is deeply passionate about the digital asset sector and believes firmly in its ability to create access to better financial services globally. So really looking forward to that. I'm just going to tell you a little bit more about the role of CryptoUK as well, because that is, as an organisation, is all about influencing policy, shaping regulation and facilitating innovation. And it is a credible voice for the evolving UK crypto industry. It's an independent body and representing the crypto asset sector as a whole, working directly with policymakers, market players, all about advocating for better education, mutual understanding and fair and balanced policy. So if you don't know about CryptoUK, do go and check them out, and perhaps if you think about joining the membership as well. So yes, introductions out of the way. So excited about this topic. And let me just tell you roughly kind of the premise of our discussion today. In today's discussion, we really want to get into how do we determine the real world environmental impact of cryptocurrencies. Now, there's a lot of discussion, and there's arguably a lot of concern about, is the crypto industry, that is mining, creating or using unnecessary quantities of power, and is that disproportionate? So we're going to be getting into that for sure. And also thinking in the context of that, where do we find our information, our intelligence, our data? How do we interpret it? And then also, as we're a sector, how do we move forwards on this important topic to make sure that we are considering the breadth of the industry, the dynamics of the industry, the importance of the discussion, and also the reality of what is truly going on as well. Now, Kirsteen, I'm going to come to you first of all, because I mentioned earlier in my remarks that you're working with Zumo. There's been a report that's come out. It's a cross-sector report called Decarbonising Crypto. And I'm really keen to hear your thoughts about some of the findings and some of the early thoughts and observations that you would make from that. I wondered whether I could come to you first of all, just to kind of set the scene. But also, I just want to come to the audience as well, just to point out a couple of bits of functionality on the platform. We would love to hear from you, right? We want to hear your questions. So there's a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So do pump your questions in there. I say pump deliberately because we're expecting a barrage. No pressure there. Send them through. I will also be representing them and hopefully navigating our way through the discussion by drawing some in as well. And also, of course, do please get involved on social media. So you can follow Zumo, you can follow our guests, and also you can follow the discussion as well. So CryptoUK is a good starting handle because they're promoting it over there, as indeed are Zumo. So, Kirsteen, as I said, I'd love to come to you first. I'm going to actually, if I may, give you a decent amount of time, because I know that summarising a report does take some consideration. So I wonder if I could give you approximately kind of 4 or 5 minutes. Would that be all right? Just to walk us through some opening remarks, and we'll drive the conversation from there.
That sounds perfect, Julia. Thank you so much. What I thought I would do is just give you an overview of the Decarbonising Crypto report that Zumo released a couple of months ago. And I'm sure there'll be threads of that come into the discussions throughout the webinar anyway. So at the moment, I'll just give you quite a high level overview. But the report came about on the back of a roundtable discussion that Zumo hosted in the latter half of 2021 with some key industry participants. And the reason for that is that we really wanted to get the insight and opinions of key industry players, and that included academics, on the decarbonisation discussion and the data, the methodologies that we have available to us in the crypto sector. And we pulled that forward into this Decarbonising Crypto, where do we go from here report. So there's a lot of input from the roundtable, but I should say that the conclusions drawn in the report and any opinions in it are Zumo's own. We don't purport to provide solutions at this stage. We want to provide a reasoned state of play that looks at the level of debate, that looks at the slight polarization sometimes in the way that crypto can be viewed in, for example, mainstream media, and come to a more reasoned middle ground. So just to give you a summary, there's 4 key sections of the report. And if I just pull out some of the key threads from each of those 4 sections, I think that'll give us quite a good overview of where we're at. So the first section is probably the meatiest. It's probably got the most substance to it, and that looks at methodology. So how do we gauge the environmental impact of cryptocurrencies? And we home in quite quickly on proof of work cryptocurrencies, because that's where we know the vast majority of electricity consumption is. And from that, we also focus in on Bitcoin, because we know Ethereum is moving to proof of stake consensus mechanism soon. So we look at the various methodologies that exist, 2 that have been contributed externally and 2 which Zumo has developed. And we assess the use cases for those, the pros and cons, and actually there probably isn't a single one of those that could be used in any circumstance. We need to have a basket of different methodologies for the different scenarios that exist. And we also look at the implications of measuring just electricity consumption and then looking to purchase renewable energy certificates on the basis of that, and then taking that forward into carbon footprint. So in effect, applying a further calculation to the electricity consumption to come up with the carbon footprint of cryptocurrencies. And we look at, again, the pros and cons of each of those methods. And then we go on to talk about benchmarking. And again, this is quite a detailed section of the report, because crypto is actually very hard to benchmark against. We have really quite a simple way of producing cryptocurrencies, which involves mining equipment and electricity. We don't really have any other significant environmental impacts. We have significant electricity use, but actually our carbon footprint is simply made of that electricity consumption. And when you try and benchmark against other sectors, it becomes far more complex, because there really aren't other sectors out there that have just electricity as part of their carbon footprint. So we talk about this, and we talk about benchmarking against, for example, traditional finance, where the carbon footprint is really tied up in the financed emissions, and that's the emissions that money is responsible for when it is being, for example, lent out by financial institutions. And then we move on to talk about collaboration in the sector. There's been a lot of movement here recently, not least with the formation of the Crypto Climate Accord. And there's a lot of work that's going on in piloting blockchain-based technologies that will hopefully soon be rolled out to the wider sector, or at least made available to the wider sector, to verify, for example, the sources of renewable electricity. And Zumo at the moment is testing a blockchain-based technology called Zero, which verifies the purchase of renewable energy certificates on the blockchain. So that all comes out of the collaboration section. And then finally, we look at technology and where that might be going, technological advances in the crypto space. And actually the pace of technological change here is really changing the complexion of the energy debate. And whilst we know proof of work cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin and Ethereum are by far the biggest users of electricity, the way that cryptocurrencies and consensus mechanisms are developing is actually moving on to more energy efficient ways of doing things. And so actually we're seeing a lot of positive movement, certainly from an electricity and climate perspective in that area at the moment. So there's a lot more to it in the report. As I say, it's available to download on the Zumo website, but that gives you an overview of some of the key areas of discussion.
It does. Well, that's wonderful. So it's going through methodologies, benchmarking, collaboration, and technology. Love that. Right. Love that. Because of course that frames out beautifully the nature of our discussion. As we come into that, so Ian, I'm going to invite you in, sort of listening to Kirsteen talk about the report and those kind of 4 key headings as well. And just your opening remarks, if you would, about what all of this means for the Crypto UK community.
Yeah, well, as many people know, crypto doesn't have a great reputation when it comes to sustainability, especially on the consensus mechanism proof of work, as previously mentioned. But this ESG question has always been there. It's just been brought into the spotlight in the last year for 2 reasons. One, that crypto's now, dare I say it, mainstream. And also certain influential celebrities have been quoted in the media. And so you could argue that when you talk to policymakers that perhaps are skeptical and believe that Bitcoin is based on pure speculation and provides absolutely zero value to society, it has no value proposition, and there's many folks in the community that will quote back to some media stories around the Dutch, what's the flower, forgotten, not poppies, the tulip mania, which was highly publicized, and however, my belief is that there is value, and the value is pretty straightforward. It's a peer-to-peer trustless payments framework, so there's value in that. But what we do see is people that are involved in the space, and we can talk to some of the technical developments, both in the hardware and the software space later, that really are focused on being sustainable, not to mention some of the way that miners are focused on the way that they consume energy, whether that be through renewable sources, whether that be reducing the amount of cooling necessary for the hardware, locating in jurisdictions that are naturally have a very cool ambient temperature. And so from what we see, there are many initiatives, and we can bring some of them up later during discussion, that are focused on this. But yes, you can't get away from the fact that proof of work consumes a lot of energy. However, so do a lot of other industries, as previously discussed, and there's quite a lot of comparisons and some good data out there to drive into that.
Well, I wonder if we could move the conversation, along a notch by focusing on this very, very question of data. And as you say, kind of, it's a fascinating thing, isn't there? There's no kind of direct comparison because no other industry relies really just on electricity alone in terms of calculating its carbon footprint. Kirsteen, can I come to you first of all? I mean, this whole thing, I suppose it's a question about reliable sources of information. So let's broaden it out to begin with. And when you think about it, where do you go to get the information that you need in order to be able to assess and to also make some recommendations for strategies?
Sure. So at Zumo, we have spent the last year developing our net zero strategy. So we've been doing a huge amount of work in this area. And we've been very focused on Bitcoin, primarily because we know that Ethereum is moving to proof of stake, and we're hoping that within the next couple of years that will have moved on and we can deal with that in a slightly different way. So what that means for us is that our focus has been very much on Bitcoin. That's not a bad place to start because we know that it's by far the biggest user of electricity. It also has some pretty good data existing for Bitcoin. So we have two key sources of data that we tend to go to. We have the Cambridge Centre for Alternative Finance, which, if people aren't familiar with that, they have a Bitcoin electricity tracker which is updated daily using the hash rate and the geographical locations of Bitcoin mining, and that's a fantastic source of information. They've got really good comparisons. It's used for benchmarking. That's where you get the information about Bitcoin electricity use versus different countries. But Cambridge have got very, very good data. Obviously, as a university, it's completely transparent in terms of the methodologies they use. Another very good source of data is the Digiconomist. Again, the methodology that they use is transparent. It's a different methodology, so you get a slightly different result, but not by orders of magnitude. And the Digiconomist also provide an electricity tracker for Ethereum too. So those would be the primary sources of information. What I would say is that's great for electricity use. We have good data for electricity use, albeit with factors of uncertainty, which are not in any way significant when you compare them to other sectors. But actually, in terms of knowing the amount of renewable electricity, there does seem to be a lot more uncertainty. There's great case studies, there's great work that's happening, but at the moment, we don't have particularly good data on that, as far as I'm aware.
And Ian, when you're talking to your community as well, I mean, they'll be thinking about, what should I reach for in terms of the research? And I wonder, there's sort of another layer to that, which is, sometimes we can get really blinded by having too much data almost too soon, if you like, in this appetite for change, and people just try to navigate their way through reliable sources and also methodologies as well. I'd love to bring your thoughts in here about, what your members are thinking about when it comes to those reliable sources.
Yeah, well, let's remember, Julia, that this industry is brand new. Bitcoin's only been around 12, 13 years, and Ethereum, the second largest layer one protocol, has only been around a handful of years. And we're only really just started talking about this in the public debate, so just within the last year. But what we do know is that the industry, just by the nature of the fact that it's it's technology and it's innovative, data is available day one, but it's how we then disseminate and understand that data. It's naturally, you can go onto any of the big chains, blockchains, and see the amount of transactions. You can see all of the hashing power, as mentioned on the Cambridge Electricity Consumption Index, shows you which locations, as mentioned. And we've seen recently, and it's worth noting, that since the China ban of mining, the large majority of mining has shifted to North America and Kazakhstan and Russia. And we know that at the peak of China's domination of mining back in 2019, they had some 75%. And we know largely a lot of that was through fossil fuels, whereas the move now, we see 75% of mining hash rate has moved to the US, Kazakhstan, Russia, and Canada, that these folks are using renewable energy and even parking next to the power station, so not siphoning out of the grid, which doesn't impact on the overall supply and demand factors. So data is available, but as the industry is nascent and as we grow, we do need better data. It's just a case of understanding which data is, let's say, correct, not manipulated, especially when it comes to, say, some sort of trading areas. And we know in DeFi, there's oracles that are used to set prices and different indexes. It's It's not perfect, but we do have a great opportunity to really provide accurate and reliable and trusted data.
And I think it's always with data is, you think about sort of data through the years. I think we've all talked about it for many, many years, is that actually it sort of finds its way, it finds its value. And there's always going to be some outlying data that people go, actually, we should either ignore or actually pay close attention to, close heed. And as the industry figures out what it needs from the data, therefore, perhaps some of these parameters will also change. I'd love to get your opinion on whether you're going to see the demands and the requirements of the data also shift as we go. And I particularly come at that with a point of view of this ever-evolving discussion about ESG from the investment world and how the institutional industry is interacting as well. And of course, all of this is just a bit of a minefield, no pun intended, of how data is just going to prove its value. But the great thing for what you're both saying is that there are some really reliable sources there as well. Ian, can I get your thoughts on that?
Sure. Well, I know there's already some investment firms that are focusing on funds, particularly for institutions that have a particular mandate to only invest in sustainable projects, that are putting together ETFs, exchange traded funds, that batch together renewable mining companies and semiconductor manufacturers. There's one launched fairly recently in North America called the VIRID Cleaner Energy Crypto Mining and Semiconductor ETF, which then provides that direct exposure for those investors that are more focused on that particular strategy. And we do also see other initiatives to try and identify a green Bitcoin. Now, that's not easy because quite a lot of the mining is grouped together, is collaborative in terms of pools. So it's really hard at this time, but that doesn't mean we can't solve for this in the future. But there is a lot of work going on behind the scenes to really focus on understanding how we can thus better invest if we want to, and if we are focused on, as the industry, I believe is quite focused on ESG. As I said, it's only a decade old. You ask the oil industry 20 years ago, it wasn't focused at all on this. And some industries particularly aren't even that concerned with being green and focusing on destroying the planet. So yeah, I think there's a lot of work to be done, but in the short space of time, a lot has already been done, which is very promising for the future.
Mm-hmm. And if I think about your remarks about also how the industry itself is adapting to become greener, you think about your renewable sources. So you've got there kind of a demand side and you've got a supply side in a way as well. But I can't help but wonder, there's sort of one question, which is, it's really encouraging to hear about how with the mining of Bitcoin, there is an appreciation and arguably a shift towards becoming more renewably power minded. But there's another element to this as well, which is, the power of those accessing the Bitcoins as well. And Kirsteen, can I get your thoughts on that? I mean, is that going to create a massive great split in the market?
Well, I think that, the power of those accessing the Bitcoin, I think in a way we've got a very simple ecosystem, at least at the moment. We basically, and if we're sticking with Bitcoin here, we've got the mining community, we've got kind of wallets, platforms, exchanges in the middle, and then we've got users or investors. You've essentially got three layers, and of course there's other things that are happening there, but you can split it down fairly easily. And the way we are looking at it at Zumo is that you can decarbonize and you can get data all the way across the chain. Now, of course, what would be the ideal solution is for all mining to be on renewable electricity, but we don't have the data for that yet. We're not quite sure exactly where we are, although we know there's lots of great things happening. But the good thing about cryptocurrency is that because of the ease with which you can apply the data to, say, a Bitcoin, then you can spread that along the chain. So at Zumo, what we're looking to do is to take account of our own use of the Bitcoin network, so that as a wallet, we are accounting for that through the use of renewable energy certificates, and that is something that can also be passed on to the user or the holder of that cryptocurrency. So there's various initiatives out there already that allow that to happen, but I do think that with the increased interest of, for example, institutional investors, that is going to become absolutely key. But going back to the point I made when I summarised the State of Play report, actually that puts us in a great place, because all we need to do is calculate what the electricity consumption is, and then we've got good data. Where the rest of the world is really struggling at the moment, and I do quite a lot of work on net zero strategies in other sectors, is what's called scope 3 emissions. That's value chain emissions, which is the not so easy to measure bits, you know, purchase goods and services and things. So other sectors are really struggling to grapple with that. And in crypto, actually, we don't have much of an impact in those areas. So we do have a very good way of being able to attribute responsibility, if you like, all across that chain, and we can do so fairly easily.
And this is what I love about this. In these remarks, we've gone from the kind of production side, we've gone through the institutional side, we've gone through the different dynamics of different sort of crypto sides. And actually, there's a remark in the chat from Tony Pettypiece. Thank you so much for your thoughts on that, Tony. Saying miners usually seek the lowest cost electricity. And the lowest cost electricity is usually renewable, which is really interesting. I wonder if we could bring in the kind of the regulator policy point of view as well. And Ian, you know, are the regulators, I mean, I imagine well, I don't know, are they tarring the industry with the same brush? Are they paying attention to this? Are they talking to you about the sustainability dynamics? Well,
as most folks in the community know, cryptocurrency is largely unregulated, and that's because it's a brand new technology, and it's only been around a short amount of time. But you know, the regulatory clarity in the UK is focused on naturally illicit finance first, so that's where the focus has been on economic crime, and then we're seeing other regulatory focus coming down the pipe, such as stable coins, because there could be a potential threat to financial stability if used to certain systemic degrees, and then also promotions and financial advertising. That's where we're at. Now, it's hard to write policy. You have to spend a lot of time. You have to discuss with the private sector, and then the policymakers have to go away, excuse me, and write these policies with their, multiple teams, including the legal guys. But in terms of the ESG discussion, what we know from our discussions with politicians down at Westminster is that all they hear is what they read in the newspaper. And when the newspaper writes about Elon Musk putting Bitcoin on his balance sheet, they see that, and then they see him say, "Oh, this is bad. This is not in keeping with Tesla's, philosophy. Then we're not going to allow people to buy our products and services with Bitcoin because of the energy consumption." And remember that Bitcoin is one blockchain. It's the most well-known, but there's dozens of others, and these others are catching up. All of these other ones do not use the same energy consumption as Bitcoin. And Bitcoin does do things to reduce its energy consumption. There's ways that you can roll up batch transactions. There's layer 2 protocols such as a Lightning Network, which looks to speed up transaction processing speed by taking lots of these transactions off the chain. But just to focus on answering the question, it's so early in the discussion at Westminster. Our job as a trade body is to go in there, educate these guys, tell them what we're doing as an industry, inform them as to what's happening on the street, who are the market participants, what are the frictions, what are the issues, because right now this is an issue and one we should address. But I think there's more important things on the table to deal with, such as consumer harms, risks, vulnerable people getting taken advantage. And that's sort of the main thrust of work that we do directly with policymakers. But there will be a time where we will start ramping up this discussion. And in fact, CryptoUK, this is, and thank you, Julie, for inviting us, the first major piece of content that we've done on this. Some of our compatriots overseas, other trade bodies do a lot of good work in the US around this question, and lots of miners are housed in the US, so naturally they're grappling with the same discussions. But yeah, it's something we want to get out ahead of, hence why we're here today, and the good work that Kirsteen and the team at Zumo are doing to address these issues. And we hear a lot of stories about, kind of in the States taking senators out to certain mining communities, if you like, just go and look, come and see. And I wonder whether in the UK there's an interesting opportunity for education. But as you say, there are so many dynamics at play and so many considerations. We could talk about taxation, we could talk about marketing, if we wanted to. But what's great is that when this conversation comes up, of course, we're ready with responses as well, which is incredibly important as well. But I want to pick up on a remark that came up earlier in our discussion, which is about how the industry is sort of evolving itself in many ways. Let's frame it as the opportunities
for decarbonisation? Let's put it that way, shall we? First of all, I mean, Kirsteen, can I come to you first of all? What opportunities do you see for the industry to decarbonise itself?
So it is full of opportunity. As an industry, we are very well placed to decarbonise rapidly. And I think this is really missing from those negative headlines that you can sometimes see. And this is really what we were keen to start communicating as part of the Decarbonising Crypto report, because, you know, there is a balanced argument to be had here. Crypto has evolved at the time of the Paris Agreement. It has evolved at the time that exactly, you know, the world needs to be moving to net zero. And it's an industry that perhaps isn't fully understood by a lot of people. And I think we need to put it in that context. That is why there's quite a lot of perhaps uncertainty about it. We've got this really easy to measure electricity consumption, but actually we don't have much else going on apart from that in terms of environmental impact. And we have a huge amount of opportunity. I would say it's going to be far easier technologically, at least for crypto, to decarbonise than almost any other sector. Firstly, we're a very young and agile sector. You know, Ian has already said that. We're evolving. We're full of ideas people. We are not full of boardrooms that are hampered with people that have been you know, in that industry for the last 40 years and can't see things another way. We've got the right people, we've got the right attitude, we've got the right pace of change. In terms of technology, we know how to go to 100% renewable electricity really quickly. The technology's there. The more solar panels, the more wind turbines, the more tidal renewable energy systems that you put in place, the lower the cost comes down. This is not like oil and gas, that the more you use it, the harder it is to get. The more infrastructure that is put in, the cheaper it gets, the more that we benefit the people that cannot otherwise afford to put that renewable electricity in. It is a win-win situation. And so we can potentially be turning this negative argument, which I have to say we need to fully respect too, you know, that it is there for a reason. It is there because we have come about quickly as a big electricity user, but we can easily be part of the solution. And I'm really excited about the opportunity that this brings, because in tandem with what's going on in crypto, what we're seeing in other sectors is this need to measure, let's call it for the purposes of this webinar, value chain emissions. It gets quite complex, but basically there's a movement within carbon footprinting that it's not acceptable to just look at electricity consumption anymore. We need to look at everything. If you're making a product, what does it cost in carbon terms to extract it from the ground? What does it cost to manufacture? What does it cost in terms of transportation to take that to where it needs to go? What about the use phase? Once you've sold it, what about the use phase and the disposal? All of that is the carbon footprint of other sectors. With us, we've got electricity. And so we really, you know, we can move quite quickly on this. And that is the premise of movements like the Crypto Climate Accord, that actually we can very constructively move towards fully decarbonising our sector and at the same time benefiting other sectors and other countries from helping to bring down the cost of renewables.
Well, I think, you know, as Ian made his remarks earlier, so you could argue that that crypto is going mainstream, and actually as a part of the value chains of others, there's huge opportunity there. But also, I mean, I love your opening remarks about the energy and the enthusiasm and the lack of legacy that's in the industry. But also there is an inpouring of investment as well. Ian, can I bring you in here for your thoughts when you think about how the industry, the opportunity of the industry to decarbonise itself as well? Is this something that your members are awake to?
Yes, we talk a lot with our community, and I like what Kirsteen said about, you know, the demand-led focus on bringing down prices for renewables. I definitely think that's a great use case. And also, you talked about, you know, the influx of capital, as you know, institutional adoption has clearly picked up in the UK around. Investment banks and fund managers want to allocate some of their portfolio to digital assets. That's in the West. Whereas if we turn back to what the guys at the Cambridge Alternative Centre for Finance look at, they also have a benchmarking study that looks at the use cases of crypto, and the use cases for Bitcoin, for example, in places such as Asia and Central America is different. It is actually being used as a peer-to-peer payments system, cross-border payments and remittances. You know, it's cheaper, it's faster, and you don't need to be, you can be unbanked and still send value. So what we're seeing is, as the industry grows, we're seeing quite a lot of human capital resource come in. And what I mean by that is these super smart researchers that have been looking at cryptography for the last 10 years are all of a sudden, oh, there's an actual use case for my skill set rather than just, theorizing. And we're seeing a shift from theoretical cryptography to actual practical applications. And so, not wanting to get too technical, but we've seen quite a lot of focus on optimization, zero knowledge rollups. And there's one organization that actually is building both software and hardware solutions. So the software solutions are, as I mentioned, batching and taking transactions off chain to make the speed of transactions faster, thus using less electricity. But also folks from the likes of IBM and Intel are developing chips that are specifically focused on solving cryptographic puzzles for Bitcoin and other such networks. And it's actually, there is some theory out there that we can push the boundaries of Moore's law. Moore's law is a famous law that was written by the guy that founded Intel, that, you reach a point where you can't double the amount of transactions that take place on a chip, every X period of years, and the cost reduces as well. But so that's being challenged. Plus, we've got quantum computing. So there's a world in a decade where we won't be restrained by the amount of calculations that take place on a physical chip. Obviously, there's a risk with security around quantum computing and hacking all this cryptography, but there's work being done there as well. So just, around what the industry, because it's now become such a mainstream area, the academic research and practical applications are really solving some of these issues that we see. And Bitcoin is the proof of work protocol is the only real issue when it comes to consuming energy. And there's even new protocols such as proof of space of time, which actually solve for some of the issues of using old hardware. So the model in this consensus mechanism is it uses unused storage space as a way to secure the network. And there's thousands, hundreds of thousands of idle databases and storage and hardware out there that this particular blockchain and protocol of this blockchain uses.
So it's so inspiring listening to you both talk with such passion about actually and the incredible opportunity and it's this wave of energy. I mean, I don't want to use a renewable, I'm not going to use a renewable sources energy sources joke or pun, because I won't go down that route. But actually, in terms of just this kind of this incredible energy that exists. But I wonder, when I think about, we're clearly saying there's huge opportunity for the industry to decarbonize itself. And there's clear opportunity and some areas where the industry is already collaborating with academics, with policymakers, with practitioners, and also looking out in terms of the value chain of others as well. I suppose my burning question is, where on earth should we start first? For the audience tuned in and those who will see it on replay as well, is, where best to begin? And of course, Ian, I have to come to you first of all.
Yeah, well, as I've said, this is the crypto industry is by nature collaborative. It's collaborative because lots of the projects are decentral. Most of the developing code is open source. And so what we always say is we're a community. We bring together all different types of market participants to bring a joined up approach and a single voice to help advocate and educate at policymaker level. So, what I would say is, if you have a specific expertise, especially similar to Kirsteen, her background, and she's now, bringing that into this industry as this debate naturally becomes front and center, as rightfully it should, then please do get involved. This community is always open to anybody that wants to participate in any shape or form.
Wonderful. And those of you who are participating online live with us now, love to hear your questions, by the way, and remarks. Like Tony popped a comment into the chat, go for it. And oh, look, as if by magic, the moment I said that, did you notice that? That's brilliant. So there's a question about China. Actually, let's bring this in now. Let's do this now. So a question about China using clean energy for POW chains is fine, but there are also some alternative consensus mechanisms coming out that are low powered from the start. Yes, we picked up it's China, not Chia. Thank you for that. Thank you for that remark. Really, really appreciate that. So Andrew's remark there in the chat, I don't know whether everybody can see that publicly because I think it's just host and panelists. So the question there is about China using clean energy but there are also alternative consensus mechanisms. Kirsteen, can I get your response to that first?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that we look at in quite a lot of depth in the State of Play report. And, you know, there is this natural evolution of blockchains. You know, the way I see it, Bitcoin has been this amazing thing in introducing a whole new technology to us. We are literally at the beginning of our journey in terms of understanding the benefits that that can bring, not just in cryptocurrencies, but the many other blockchain applications that there are. And of course, we're having different consensus mechanisms evolving in that process. And actually, that's taking us in many ways further and further away from the kind of proof of work routes. And I think proof of work is going to be a very important consensus mechanism that does remain. You know, as far as I can see, Bitcoin isn't moving off that anytime soon, although we know that Ethereum is going to. And I think what's interesting here is that for those of us in the sector, we can see that and we know that. I think for an outsider who sees these headlines, cryptocurrency equals Bitcoin, and I think that's where the problem is. So yes, I know that there's fantastic work happening in the cryptocurrency space. There's lots of new consensus mechanisms. There's lots of new developments happening at such a fast pace that are really going to move this forward very quickly. But I think that we are in a situation where we have a public perception issue, which is that probably for a lot of people that aren't familiar with cryptocurrencies, and even those who are semi-familiar with them, proof of work is what they know of, and Bitcoin in particular is kind of representative of that. Now, I think we need the communication bit. To me, is something that we need to do very carefully. I think it's easy to become defensive. It's easy to see an unconstructive headline or a badly worded headline, or perhaps even an inaccurate headline, and feel that that is an injustice and that we need to respond to it in a certain way. And I think the wider communication issue needs to be carefully considered here, because yes, absolutely, there's fantastic mechanisms that are being developed that are really going to move us in a different direction going forwards in terms of electricity consumption. But we do still have proof of work cryptocurrencies, and that fundamentally is what people see from outside the sector.
And I think that communication piece is as you say, kind of to be very, very considered as we go through that. And I wonder whether there's an element, actually, and Kirsteen, can I stay with you on this? And Andrew, thank you again for your remark there, really, really helpful. Because actually, you know, this is being taken up to the highest level. So I think, particularly in the context of the Paris Climate Accord. And I know that Zumo was one of the first signatories in that. I mean, when you're
the Crypto Climate Accord, yeah.
That's correct. Yeah, sorry, forgive me. Yes. No, not the Paris one. That's a good,
I'd love to be a signatory to that, but no, Crypto Climate Accord.
Well, it's an interesting question in terms of taking this up to a high level positioning. Is, you know, are you on that journey? Do you think this is going to come mainstream at that kind of a level?
I think it is. I mean, I think, you know, I've already said for us, we've prioritized Bitcoin exactly because it is the biggest user of electricity. We also have good data on it, and it's the one that people tend to be most concerned about initially. So there's many good reasons to look at that. But, you know, I think proof of work is a really interesting concept inside and outside of crypto, because as far as I'm aware, there's nothing else like it. You know, if we look at this purely from the energy consumption point of view and the decarbonisation point of view, I cannot think of another sector where one individual player does not have control or a lot of influence over the electricity consumption or energy use of a key part of that system. And in any other sector, we can choose our supply chain. So the way that carbon strategies are developed in other sectors, if you have a big company that's looking to decarbonize its supply chain, it can work with individuals in that supply chain, and it can choose suppliers or options within that supply chain that have a lower carbon footprint. And what's really interesting for us in proof of work is those options are not there. You know, we need to work with all the Bitcoin in circulation. That is exactly how the protocol was set up. I'm not suggesting that it should be changed at all, but it presents us with a unique set of circumstances that I think are hard to communicate.
And Ian, I wonder whether in the mix of that, when you think about sort of the way that the industry is going, I wonder if there's sort of, as we sort of reflect on the conversation as well, I wonder if there's anything that we're at risk of overlooking as we move forward.
Can I come back to that? I just wanted to clarify the question from Andrew in the audience.
Yeah, by all means, yes.
Yes, Chia, the Chia network, CIA, is a blockchain that uses a new consensus consensus mechanism called proof of space and time, which basically utilizes the storage, idle storage across the internet. And so it's a double whammy. It doesn't consume hardly any energy. And I wrote down a number here. They basically quote, Chia uses 0.16% of the annual energy consumption of Bitcoin and 0.36% of Ethereum. And they also have this circular initiative that reduces e-waste through the secure reuse of storage, promoting a second use of a hard drive for what they call Chia farming, using farming instead of mining. It somewhat is more palatable to ESG. But sorry, to come back to your question, Julia, please, can you remind me? Apologies.
No, at all. And actually, I owe Andrew an apology. I read that at some speed, peripheral vision on a big screen, and I genuinely thought it was a typo that said China. So I apologize. Hands up, that's my error. But yeah, no, thank you for clarifying that. And Andrew, thank you again for posting about that. Yeah, no, it was really the question about, so we're going into the last sort of few minutes of the discussion really, is, you know, while we're considering the dynamics at play, and while we're considering the software, if you like, the hardware, you know, the market dynamics, the institutional point of view, the policy point of view, I wonder if there's anything that we're at risk of overlooking.
Overlooking focused on the topic of debate, ESG today. Well, I hope that we don't over focus our thinking to this, because right now the annual consumption forecast on the Cambridge website on their index is equal to other industries, but it's actually less than, say, the wastage coming out of certain other industries. So we need to put this into perspective, that yes, there is an argument that if you do believe that there is no underlying value, which I vehemently disagree with, and there's many hundreds of thousands of people across the globe that could argue that isn't the case. As I said, there's real use cases of people being included into the financial sector that are the unbanked. There's also people generating wealth through gaming and using non-fungible tokens as sort of ways to monetize their skills now, based on blockchain technology. Not to mention reducing costs of sending remittances overseas. So it's just, again, it comes back to what our main vision is at CryptoUK is fair, balanced, proportionate regulation. And I really would like to develop a greater narrative in the broadsheets and the media generally, that Bitcoin isn't boiling the ocean. It is something, as Kathleen correctly said, that you can 100% easily identify how much energy consumption is. But that's getting lost in translation when all these other things that have been utilizing and not considering their impact on the planet for decades. So the overall footprint of Bitcoin is like a tiny, tiny baby insect footprint versus other value propositions that have existed in the past that have changed our lives for the better. And that's what this technology does. So just put it into proportion. That's all I would really ask.
And I'm curious to ask, I mean, Kirsteen, would you agree with that? Would you say that that's the truth? And what else do you see that you're concerned we might be overlooking?
So, well, I do agree with that, but what I would say is the time, we need to be really mindful of the timing, because as I've said, we've came to prominence at the time of the Paris Agreement, where there is acceptance throughout every country in the world that we need to move rapidly to net zero. And that is the difference. Crypto isn't normalized yet. So if you look at other sectors, and the Cambridge Centre for Alternative Finance has got this fantastic resource where you can look on there and you can look at the electricity consumption of other sectors, and it compares it to things like cement and fridges and all the rest of it, and arguably they have become so normalized in our lives that we don't question them to the extent. For something new, people will question it, and I think it would, as a sector, I think probably we need to understand that better, and that will help us communicate it better. I'm not suggesting that's a job for CryptoUK. I think it's a job for all of us in all the conversations that we have day to day, that the circumstances of it are different. And likewise, what I would say is it's very normalized that we hold money in our bank accounts. It's very normalized that we put pensions in a pension pot. And there's been 2 reports that have come out recently which show the impact of these financed emissions. Now, most people that put their money in the bank account just assume it's there and don't really think about it. But actually, when it's in there, it's being lent out to fund other projects, institutions, etc., in a very complex financial system. And those financed emissions are, depending on the report you read, a CDP one puts that at 700 times the actual operational impact of banks, and a WWF Greenpeace one puts the financed emissions of UK institutions at 1.8 times the UK's entire carbon footprint. It's massive. Now, I don't think that the right thing to do here is point the finger. The finance sector needs to do a lot to clean up its act. But the point I'm making is, because that has become so normalized for all of us, we haven't questioned our pensions or the money that we've put in our banks, but people are questioning crypto because it's new. And I think if we can see it in that context, it perhaps helps to understand why that's the case. And all sectors need to fully address their carbon footprint. Yes, we may not be so significant as other sectors, but actually in the move towards net zero, that probably isn't the point. The point is we all need to get there as quickly as we can, and actually we can do it more quickly than other sectors with the technology that we have. So I don't disagree with anything at all, but I just think, to me, I feel very fortunate coming from a background that is not in crypto and is in net zero. I find crypto fascinating. I see all the massive potential that it can bring to society, and I think we're only at the beginning of this really exciting journey. But I think I can kind of see where some of the reticence comes from externally, and I think it's that we really need to be addressing and harnessing.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you for your thoughts on that. It's always important to be slightly cautionary and just be very considered in kind of where we're at risk of overlooking and what maybe some of the perceptions and realities therefore might well be. I'm going to return to the audience actually, because we've had a couple of questions in while you've been talking. One of these from Marek. Marek, thank you for this. He says China. No typo, noted. Thank you for that. So China has banned Bitcoin mining due to several reasons, one of which was the concern about the environmental impact. Now, Michael Saylor, the Bitcoin advocate and CEO of MicroStrategy, I'm just trying to get this to scroll down properly, said that he believed that this, I'm just trying to find, this ban by China is $1 trillion mistake. Seeing the hash rate is now on ATH again, fully back from the levels seen before the ban, do you tend to agree with Saylor or not? And then there was a remark from the audience saying, perhaps China is more concerned about controlling its population via a CBDC than the environment. Their ban is an anti-democratization move. Love to get your thoughts. Who'd like to come in here?
I'm happy to go first, if that's right. Yeah, China, we mentioned it earlier, and was the banning a mistake, as quoted? Well, it depends what your viewpoint is. And yes, there was, when that ban took effect, there was a drop in hash rate, but that's soon, within a couple of months, got picked up, as I mentioned, by North America and Eastern Europe. So it's a mistake for the private sector, but we know that China is, a state-controlled nation. And just to touch on the CBDC, interestingly, that they're using this, in my personal view, as a tool to, one, surveil their population, and to create constraints against perhaps capital flight, moving a digital Chinese yuan offshore. We know that they've tried to control and manipulate their currency in the past. That's the negatives of the CBDC. That's what one would expect from an authoritarian state such as China. So that's no surprise. But it's piqued the interest of all other governments. If China's doing this, we should do this. But then we have the opportunity for the benefits. This is programmable money. We could follow the source of funds from illicit finance. This is something we focus quite hard on. At CryptoUK, is educating policymakers, and we're doing some sessions with Treasury and G7 this week around ransomware, and how we have a great opportunity with crypto to be able to freeze funds in super quick time, just because of the nature of the technology, excuse me, the analytics that we can do, and how this industry, as I say, is collaborative and can move in real time to achieve these ends. So yeah, China can do its thing, but for me, it's just one small part of the overall picture.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Kirsteen, I'm going to ask you, if you don't mind, not to pick on them, but I'd like to get through another question so we can get through all the audience questions, because I think it's really important as well. There's another one that's come through on the Q&A from Stuart saying that 95% of altcoins have no viable use case. In whatever form these protocols consume energy, it is a waste of energy. So therefore, could you argue that a purge of some of these protocols would go a long way to improving the ESG narrative? Now, I appreciate, obviously, you're not being a crypto specialist, more of a sustainability specialist. Just wondering your first thoughts on that, and then perhaps Ian could come in on the back of that.
I mean, I think my understanding of the question may not be quite right. So Stuart, please jump in if it's not. But, you know, when we're talking about energy consumption in cryptocurrency, actually the key thing that we need to be talking about is proof of work, because the other consensus mechanisms pale into insignificance in terms of the energy consumption that they have. So I probably won't even talk about any others as part of this. But in terms of proof of work, we know that we have some of the biggest cryptocurrencies, certainly by market value, that are in proof of work consensus mechanisms. So I don't even know that I don't think it's even possible. You know, we can't decide to change that or get rid of proof of work. It's here. The whole point is that no single player has overall control of it. It's here, and it's here to stay. Now, if anybody else's understanding of that is different to mine, then of course, please put that in the chat. But I think what we need to do within the sector is find a way of working with that. Now, I know Ethereum's moving to proof of stake, and that's a fantastic example as to how we can do that. But my understanding is that Bitcoin will not be doing that at any point soon. So I'm not even sure that it's a question that I can start to answer.
Mm-hmm. Ian, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Stuart. And there's over 10,000 tokens been minted, and you know, that's one of the benefits of the industry, because it's trustless, and you can just, you know, fork anyone's code and build your own blockchain and issue a token on that blockchain. However, there are these altcoins, or as other people will call them, SHIT tokens, that don't have any real use case or value. Now, I can't speak for every single consensus mechanism that these altcoins use, and I think you know, Kathy's touched on that point. But just like the overall market cap of crypto assets, I'm just looking on CoinGecko here now, the overall market cap of every token is 2.2 trillion, and Bitcoin has 890 billion of that. So nearly, you know, it's nearly 50%. Right. So there's your answer there. Then you add in Ethereum, you add in the top 10 tokens, and then 90% of the market. And all of the other top 10 will work off of, this is layer 1 protocols I'm talking about, will work off of POS, proof of stake. So their carbon footprint won't be big. And all those other coins, we call them long tail assets. The volumes and size of these particular markets, tokens, doesn't really impact on, in my view, on the overall consumption.
Mm-hmm. So I'm always very aware that when we run a webinar, so this is actually an open-ended, so we've got a good sort of hour and a half open if anybody any questions, but I'm always aware that when we could have hit the hour, that's when most people are going, look, I've got to move on to my next meeting. So what I wanted to do is just invite you all, invite you both to just make a couple of final remarks, which I'll phrase in a question. But to the audience, there are more questions coming through. So what we'll do is we'll finish with the final remarks, and then we'll come back to those questions if anybody can stay with us for longer. Also, if you do have to hop, but this will probably be a replay of this. I don't stand for a second, so you could always come back and then watch it again and then pick up the answers as well. But my question is, you know, when we think about the potential, so let's look at the road ahead as well. You know, what do you think, in all of your, in the context of the entire discussion, what do you think has the greatest short-term potential? And Kirsteen, I'm going to come to you first of all. And if I could ask you to be relatively succinct with your remark, and then we can go back to the audience questions.
The greatest short-term potential, I honestly think, I believe that is in the communication side of it, both within the crypto sector and outside it. I think we're not going to realise our true potential as a sector unless we go over this Bitcoin energy hump, which is what the perception issue is. So I think we can quite quickly address that and really start to move that conversation forwards.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. And Ian, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, just to add to Kirsteen's point, I think that's dead right. You know, what keeps me awake at night is there's a lot of discussion around the issue that Bitcoin's boiling the ocean, and if that develops into some ill thought out policy, then we could really see some existential threats coming to the industry that will stifle innovation. So it's vitally important that we have these debates, we get more out there, we educate more, focus on the benefits. We cross-border payments, I mentioned, stable coins could be seen as a new way to, pay employees, pay suppliers. We live our lives more online. Crypto is the money designed specifically for the internet, more e-commerce. So it's about focusing on the benefits, but also not ignoring the issues such as ESG and, as I mentioned, consumer harms and risk that we're seeing too.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you for your thoughts on that. What's been interesting is it stimulated even more debate in the chat. So I just want to make a comment, which is, yes, this is available sort of on demand afterwards as well. But I wonder if we could return to then the audience. It's great to see a lot of stimulated discussions. So I wanted to pick up on the question about, someone made a remark saying that let's be mindful that when we talk about purging coins, that's essentially what China has done. So I'm not sure if we should really sort of talk about purging coins in the context of all of this as well, as a consideration. But then the other one was, which really caught my eye, was from another Stuart. Stuarts are being very active today. I definitely agree that lack of normalization is an issue that draws skepticism. And where are we? I definitely agree that the lack of normalization is an issue that draws more skepticism than perhaps is fair when it comes to the environmental impact. But how do we normalize Bitcoin and others when incredible value proposition that crypto offers is being overshadowed by investors and traders wanting to make a quick buck? Interesting question, really interesting question. And again, that's the dynamic of institutional meets the industry. Kirsteen, would you like to pick that one up, and then I'll bring it in?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I mean, I guess for me, because I probably see this slightly differently from a lot of people within the sector, because my background is very much carbon. So I kind of see the carbon footprint, the electricity consumption bit, what is happening to the carbon footprint as being fairly independent of what happens outside of that, in terms of whether it's institutional investors or everyday holders of cryptocurrencies. I think what's interesting at the moment, because we have quite a simple ecosystem, is that when you look at the electricity consumption of cryptocurrencies, which, as we've already said, is kind of the entire sum of our environmental impact, not belittling the impact of mining equipment, for example, but really it's the electricity consumption that we're concerned with. But that then is the sum part of the environmental impact. We're not, for example, as with financed emissions, kind of lending that out to fund oil and gas projects, which is where the emissions really come in. So I think at the moment, I'm not seeing the institutional investment part as a complication to this. If anything, I'm seeing it as a driver because of the ESG concerns of institutional investors, that actually they will be quite a driving force towards decarbonising crypto.
And Ian, when you look at this as well, do you see the kind of the quick buck trading? I'm being slightly pejorative in that remark, but those dynamics of wanting to make, there's high frequency trading, and then there is, kind of more passive trading strategies.
Yeah, it's not just institutions that are profiting on trading on different tokens. Retail is doing that too. And interestingly, crypto has been largely led by the retail sector, and its institutions coming to the table, coming to the party later. But there is benefit for institutions being involved, not just on the speculative side, which with it brings its own issues, but it also brings new development, new innovation, a lot of resource coming to the table. And not to mention, just recently, the UK government closed a consultation in March, which was focused on stablecoins, but also on DLT, decentralized ledger technology, which blockchain is part of that subset, really improving financial market infrastructures. So one, to focus on ESG, one could assume that there'll be a world in the future where blockchain replaces the financial market infrastructure that we have. Many different counterparties along the way that execute a trade, then post-trade settlement happens, then there's pre and post funding, central depositories and custodians, and then post-trade reconciliations, all these parts that make up financial market infrastructure. They burn a lot of energy, right? And that is inefficient, not just in terms of cost and time to settle, blockchain, you know, is settlement happens on the Bitcoin network in 10 minutes. You know, settlement in an FX market happens in 2 minutes. That's ineffective, inefficient, and creates a whole host of frictions behind the scene. And that directly, like, can probably be quantified, but to Kathleen's point, it's quite difficult with finance because it's not as transparent, and the data isn't, you know, in the public domain straight away. But the technology is being looked at and developed as a way to really reduce these inefficiencies, which in turn reduces carbon footprint.
And to pick up on that point, and also an earlier one about the altcoins as well, Bogdan posted in the chat and into the Q&A as well. His view is not really agreeing to purge 95% of altcoins for improving the ESG narrative. He said, what is interesting is we already have a first carbon negative blockchain in Europe. So that's yeah, sort of brings to life your remark there. I just want to go, and this essentially will be the last question of today. I feel like we could talk for hours. Actually, it's extraordinary how time flies by. But there was one question actually for Kirsteen, just to pick up on this communication perspective that's come through. And Sue, thank you for the question as well. So given this is future focused, what does Kirsteen see as the optimal solution to both further reduce emissions and also get the message out into the public arena around the data interpretation? And what do you see as being some of the barriers, blockers to getting this picked up by the mainstream media?
That's an excellent question, and probably one that needs quite a long answer, but I'll try and do it quickly. I mean, you know what, let's start with the barriers to the mainstream media, because that's the problem. They want headlines, and actually having a reasoned debate and a reasoned response doesn't give headlines. And so we may need to look at other ways of doing it. Maybe it's not going to be headline grabbing, you know, so maybe there's other ways that we need to communicate that doesn't play into the headlines' hands. In terms of how we communicate it, I think we need concrete action along with communication. And we have a lot of concrete action. I'm not suggesting that that isn't already happening, but what we haven't really been very successful at doing, I think because we are quite a new sector and because the energy use of Bitcoin has really only become an issue in the public consciousness in the last few years, is pulled all this together into, for example, great case studies and more work onto the kind of data gathering and renewable energy. So there's a lot of great stuff that we can communicate. I don't think that we necessarily have it all in one place in order to do that. I don't necessarily think we have the mechanisms in place to do that now. The formation of the Crypto Climate Accord back in April was fantastic because they're developing quite a lot of blockchain-based technologies that will allow the verification of, for example, sources of renewable electricity, so we can actually start verifying what I think the industry has kind of known and assumed for a long time with concrete data. I'm no communications strategy expert, so I'm probably not the one to decide exactly how this should happen. But I do, you know, I've spoken about the fact that we've risen to prominence at the time of the Paris Agreement. It's a new technology, it's a new industry, and all those things do make it different from an existing sector, which is looking to decarbonize. What I would say is really going to work in our favour, as well as all the technological advances that we've spoken about and the wider adoption of crypto. The one thing that really will work in our favour is the fact that other sectors now are not only under a huge amount of pressure to quantify and disclose their own carbon footprint, but that is now looking at what I referred to earlier as the entire value chain emissions. And when they start doing that, and when that enters into the public consciousness a bit more, then it will become very apparent that crypto is not the you know, the big energy sapping industry that, you know, the public perception sometimes says that it is. Because actually, when you look at it alongside the value chain emissions of most other sectors, then they start to look far more significant. And I think because that will be happening at the time that we want to be communicating as a sector, then that will be a helpful part to the conversation.
Yeah, really interesting. And you know, I wonder, as your final remarks, you know, listening to Kirsteen's comments there, any final comments from you?
Yeah, I agree with everything Kirsteen said there, and the
That's
media.
no fun. I don't like having panels where we all agree with each other.
We're fighting the same fight, aren't we? Just
exactly.
Two different areas, and the media are the media, and we're fortunate we live in a free society where we have freedom of speech, but you know, naturally with that comes journalists that just only pick up on certain stories and perhaps don't report you know, unbiased and balanced viewpoints. But I just keep going back to the fact that this industry is so new, and there wasn't a year ago, we weren't getting calls from any broadsheets to comment, but we are now, and that has just really ramped up. in the last 6 months. And we have our own media strategy. We're trying to develop relationships with some of the, you know, big media outlets to give that balanced view. And hopefully, you know, we have a great pedigree and reputation of fair reporting in the UK, and we have, you know, standards around that. So yeah, I'm positive, and I will just keep doing what we're doing, and, you know, the good work that we're doing today, and, you know, Kirsteen's good work with our member and other members developing thought leadership work and the decarbonisation report. It's a starter for 10, right? And that's all we've got, and we'll continue to do more.
So this has been recorded. This is actually my very last webinar of the year. I have to say, it's been one of my favourite, actually. Got a way to go out. I mean, first of all, you know, I just want to thank the audience for all your participation as well. It really has been wonderful to get your comments, your remarks, even your discussion going to you around certain topics as well. I also quite like the humour that's come through on the chat as well. So I really appreciate that. That, of course, is always inspired by great panellists. And Kirsteen Harrison, thank you so much for sharing the insights to the research from Zumo, and thank you for all your contributions today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And Ian Taylor from CryptoUK, thank you. Really, really appreciate not only the work you're doing on behalf of the industry, but also your thoughts, your considerations, your cautionary words, and your optimism for the pathway ahead into 2022.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's a pleasure speaking with you folks today.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I've been Julia Streets. I hope you enjoyed the webinar as much as I have, and really, really look forward to bringing more events to you in 2022. In the meantime, stay well, enjoy the festive break. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.